Welcome back to Think Tech Talks. I'm Jay Fidell. Today in the 3 to 4 block, we're going to talk to Jeff Hong. He's a tech executive with TechMana LLC, local company. We're going to talk about covenants not to compete in Hawaii. It's really an important topic. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you very much, Jay.
Great to have you here. Before we begin, I'd like to just mention that right after this show, we're going to have Hawaii, the state of energy. We're going to talk about new energy projects at the airport. So look forward to that too. So Jeff, tell us a little about yourself. Give us a short bio of your life and times and adventures in the tech industry.
Oh, sure. So I actually started working with computers in high school here in Hawaii at Kaiser. And I worked for the Japanese American Institute of Management Technology.
James.
Right?
HAWAIIAN
Valley, yeah. So
yeah.
Kaiser graduate.
Kaiser, James, it's all the same.
It's all the same thing. So that's where I kind of started, and then went to school on the mainland, got my degree, went to work for both the Army, because they paid for my school, but additionally for some startups, and then eventually for Microsoft. And that actually gave me an opportunity to come home to Hawaii after working for many years in California and a few other places.
Well, you're a California tech guy then.
Yeah,
essentially.
no, that's
what
where I
happened to
kind of
you.
had my roots.
That's a long way from Kaiser and James.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so you're back now, and you're doing, tech coding and consulting and consultation of one kind or another.
Yeah, we've been doing a lot of work around the travel industry software, so it's a pretty vital and interesting line of work to do here in Hawaii. The sale of a plane or a seat on a plane or a room in a hotel, kind of the same idea. You have expiring inventory that needs to be sold for as much as you can get at the beginning, and then maybe for less as the day comes up to the day of sale.
So you're adapting to the market. That's
definitely.
the genius of it, yeah.
A lot of technology in that area.
Well, you say technology in that area, but I recall a guy who was looking for venture capital a few years ago, and he approached the Hawaii Venture Capital Association, to pitch them on his idea for software. And what he said was stuck in my brain. He said that Hawaii is a first-class tourist destination. We have so many hotels, so much experience, so much of our economy, like it or not, is dedicated to, tourism.
Hospitality, yeah.
And so we should use our experience on the ground, or all these years of experience, all the fine points, the best practices that we've learned. We should use that to build, the best kind of software for the hospitality industry in the world. That's what he said. Yeah, you're involved in that.
I hope to. I mean, certainly we help out with a lot of the local industries in terms of creating software that will give them a competitive advantage. But oddly, I've been working with a group in the MIT travel school graduates. So who knew? Travel schools, where there's a section at MIT of people with PhDs in the topic.
They do a lot.
So you can actually do a whole lot of really interesting advanced studies of MIT caliber. They made a technology spin-off. Got purchased by Google, and now they're part of Google, and actually Hawaiian Airlines uses some of their technology.
All right. So maybe we're on that path, and maybe one day we can, do a lot of the coding and design here and sell it.
That would be great.
Yeah.
Certainly we look forward to growing that industry, but as we talk about non-competes, that's actually an element that works to our disadvantage in terms of making Hawaii a place for doing intellectual property, innovation economy type of work.
Okay, well let's try to cover the ground now. Call it non-competes 101.
Okay.
What are we talking about in non-competes? So you've done a lot of reading and writing about this. So what do you want to tell people to make them understand what it is?
So covenants not to compete are basically an agreement to restrain someone from conducting what would typically be a lawful business. And so there are a number of reasons for having them. And they've been around. In fact, I was just telling you beforehand, it's an auspicious year, or not auspicious, depending upon the way that you look at it. It's the 6th century anniversary of the first English law case of non-competes. And so the way that non-competes kind of grew up is it has its roots in English common law. And The case there was a guy who wanted to stop the trade secret, and it's primarily to protect trade secrets of clothes dyeing from moving from one village to another. And the judge actually was going to throw him in jail for abusing the law system. But things have changed, not for the better or worse, depending upon where you sit. But a covenant not to compete, you can use it, it's often used in the technology business to protect trade secrets in the manner of preventing you from going to work for a competitor. And in that effect, it's perhaps effective, but having roots that are 600 years old, perhaps it needs some updating. And in fact, the law here has moved forward a bit to try to protect trade secrets in a modern kind of way.
Yeah, my recollection is that trade secrets is a whole other topic. What I mean to say is that there's a whole body of law just relating to trade secrets,
right,
and not restrictive covenants that, you know, is intended to protect the trade secrets of one company against another company. And you could have an agreement, a confidentiality agreement,
right,
couldn't you, with an employee having, you know, nothing to do with the competition covenant not to compete or anything like that. It says you will not release, you would not disclose the trade secrets of this company, and define what you're talking about. You know, it could be the formula for Coca-Cola, who knows what. And I'm sure they got those kinds of agreements, and they're, you know, they're enforceable mostly.
Right.
They're all over the country, and they cover a lot of secrets, and that's the way competition runs. So why exactly, you know, you say that this was originally done in, what was it again, 1414?
1414, 600 years ago.
There's a rhythm about that.
Yeah.
It was done in 1414 to protect trade secrets, but we've had a branch, you know, a fork in the road on that, and now there is relief separately for trade secrets.
Exactly, and so it's kind of an old style of trying to, you know, keep people serfs in some sense from going to work for competition in the guise of protecting trade secrets, right? And by barring someone from working for a competitor, you definitely have that effect, but its net effect on an economy, not necessarily the best, right? And that you, for the technology sector in particular, you have very qualified and intelligent people in a certain field, and you're potentially barring them from the field of, I don't know, optimizing sale and revenue of flights or hotels in the hospitality business.
Yeah, well, we didn't talk about exactly how wide you're going to extend that, but still on the 101 side of things. So where does a covenant like this go, and how does it come into being? You know, after 600 years of practice, I mean, what is it like out there in the business community? How do you find yourself enmeshed in a covenant not to compete?
So typically, there's two styles, right? The ones that I'm totally familiar with are the ones in technology. More than half of the people who are engineers sign them. They often don't realize that there's even one in existence.
This is buried in a long employment agreement.
On your first day with your 401k and all of that kind of stuff.
Sign a bunch of papers.
And within a non-disclosure agreement, you might have 2 pages of legalese that says, you know, I promise not to talk about any of these secrets that we're working on, which is really valid, and as you pointed out, a large body of law to protect. And then there might be a little section that says, and I will not work for any competitor for whatever period of time you put in.
Slid into the text.
Yeah.
In 6-point type.
Well, the whole thing is 6-point type of 3 pages, so if you're a lawyer and you can go through it, then good, but most of us engineers are not.
And you're happy to have the job.
Oh,
and presumably it pays good enough to, you know, attract you, and so you sign off on that in the 401k form and all the other forms that you have as you know, get into the company,
deposit,
and human resources,
that kind of
all that stuff. Yeah, just a little one more paper in a package of
There you
paper.
go.
No big thing. However,
then when maybe you want to go and work somewhere else, they'll pull out that form from whenever it is that you started and said, hey, you know, you can't actually take that new job because, and then you'll see this.
But what does the covenant say? I mean, we're still on 101
Oh,
here.
okay, sorry. So it might say something like, I will not provide any services to anyone that I provided services to within the scope of my employment with you.
So if you're working for client X, you know, company client X, that is a client of the company who is your employer, you can't work for that company after you leave
Right.
your job.
So those are some that are specific to clients, or it might be you cannot work writing software in the whatever field. In Hawaii, we had a couple of cases that established the common law precedents here, and that was a guy who worked for Technicolor. And, you know, and back in 1976, that's when all of this began here in Hawaii. He wasn't even a engineer that knew the secrets of color processing or anything like that. He was just the general manager of sales for Technicolor here and for film processing. And he was barred from working in the film processing business in Hawaii for 3 years.
So he didn't really have trade secrets. He didn't have technical trade secrets.
No, that was...
He may know how the company works,
right,
but he didn't have anything really hot there.
Exactly.
And so now you get a covenant without a trade secret, and query whether that does any good, you know, to the company that it runs in favor. And really, I think there's a question about that. Does it do any real good, affirmatively, to stop the fellow from working, you know, in the same area after he leaves your company? And the answer is probably no, but it stops him from leaving.
It stops him from leaving, but it also stops him from competing, right?
Meaning the next company is not going to be will not be in as good a position to compete with the first company.
Because the labor pool of the first company is now all locked in, so you can't get to other sources of labor. And so here in Hawaii especially, it's like in 1976, right? How many big color processing places were there? Maybe Kodak and Technicolor. So the Kodak guys are stuck, and so there's only maybe 2 places to go.
Okay, and then it'll say what happens. You know, so he quits company 1, or in fact, he doesn't even have to quit company 1. His employment agreement expires, and the covenant usually carries on after that for a while,
right,
years maybe. And then he goes to company 2, gets a job, and it's in the same area. It's in the prohibited area under the language, whatever the language says in this covenant. So what does the thing usually provide? What is the first company able to do to stop him and the second company?
So typically the first company will discover that the employee is working somewhere that they think that infringes on the contract. And so, or breaches a contract, and so they'll go to a judge and say, hey, I have this covenant not to compete, and he's breaking it, stop them from working. And then they'll also go to the company that hired him, and I forgot what the term is when you're messing with somebody's contract.
Interference with economic advantage or something along those
something
lines?
along those lines. So both the poor guy who's going to work is being threatened with a lawsuit, and certainly a judge might bar them from working in that fashion.
I mean, with an injunction, say you cannot work. You cannot work for company B because you have this covenant hanging all over you.
Exactly. And that happened to the guy, the Technicolor guy. He had to leave and go to California, in fact, to find a job.
Now, that's an interesting example. We're going to take that further after this break. I mean, what happens in the larger sense when the guy from Technicolor has to leave, you know, the guy who conceivably has technical knowledge, or at least he's got knowledge to build an industry here. He leaves one employer, can't work for another employer, has to leave town. What's the net effect on the economy?
Right.
You know, we'll explore that right after this break. We're here with Jeff Hong. He's a tech executive par excellence. His company is TechMana, LLC. You're here on Think Tech Talks. I'm Jay Fidell, and we're talking about covenants not to compete, which is a very important topic, and you'll see why after we come back.
Aloha, I'm Nicole Horry for Think Tech. For nearly half a century, the Hawaii Foreign Trade Zone No. 9 has brought the benefits of the Foreign Trade Zone program to Hawaii businesses and entrepreneurs. DBET, the Department of Business, Economic Development, and Tourism, operates Hawaii's Foreign Trade Zone program to encourage international business and economic development. The Foreign Trade Zone's mission is to increase the amount of international trading activity in Hawaii, thereby providing employment opportunities for the residents of our island state. For more information, see ftz9.org. I'm Nicole Horry.
I'll need the coffee.
We're back, we're live. We're Think Tech Talks here on a given Wednesday with Jeff Hong, a tech executive with Tech Mana LLC. We're talking about covenants not to compete in Hawaii, something you really need to know about. So I want to take that strand a little further, the one we left before the break, Jeff. We were asking, we had this Technicolor case where the fellow was working for Technicolor, and somehow in the pile of human resources papers, there was a restrictive covenant agreement, a covenant not to compete, and he signed it. And when he left to go to work for, was it Kodak or?
I don't know what the
whoever it
competing
was,
company
doesn't matter.
was.
He went to work for company number 2. Technicolor said, no, that violates.
Well, actually, it's a little worse than that. Originally, he went to California, was starting to work, and really wanted to come back home. And when he came back home, he came back to a job that infringed, and that's where he got stopped.
Okay, and Technicolor stopped him,
Yeah.
and then the end of the day, in practical effect, was he didn't want to fight him, or maybe he did fight him.
No, he did fight him, and he lost.
He lost because the state policy at the time in Hawaii was that's perfectly enforceable, all of
Exactly.
it, and you get to suffer, and the employer wins, the employee loses. It's interesting that should happen here because the employee has so many rights in other ways, but in this way, it's still pretty old-fashioned. So he left. He went to California, and he's gone. What effect on the industry, first of all?
Well, so obviously you have somebody that is qualified, knows his job, has the ability to bring competition into a marketplace, and by kind of exercising the personal monopoly over that person in this place for this type of job and excluding them, you get to retain your monopoly in a small locality like Hawaii, right? So, if you believe in capitalism, you believe that having competition drives down prices, and the reverse of that is stifling competition causes prices to remain high. And so you can protect your monopolies by protecting competition from coming into the marketplace. And that's kind of the net effect, right?
So on a logic basis, you conclude that when he left town, there was less competition, and that the monopoly continued to rule the field.
Right.
Or was more of a monopoly that way, in sort of going in that direction. And the other element of it is the talent's gone.
Exactly.
Whatever talent he had, it's gone from the marketplace here, from any employer.
Right.
And so our economy is affected by the loss. It's a brain drain. It's a forced brain drain. Is what it
Exactly.
is.
And oddly, the words that you use, forced brain drain, was the Wall Street Journal just had an article on it this past year using those same terms. It's a brain drain from wherever it is that you're living, because you can cause people to leave and to lose their expertise in their field of study. But in Hawaii, it's even worse than that.
Okay. It's bad enough already, but go ahead.
So in 2006, there was another case that went to the Supreme Court, and it was called Sevens Enterprises versus Del Rosario. And so, what was the thing that was going on here? Her name was actually Kaoru Del Rosario. So she was trained as a briefer, and I'm reading from the actual text. She had training including memorizing scripts, observing actual briefing sessions, and responding to questions from customers, and being critiqued as part of the on-the-job training. And the training was to promote and sell products from the shop, operational tours, and souvenir items. So that kind of high-tech trade secret is what Sevens Enterprises was trying to protect in terms of their little monopoly over this woman.
Wow. But that's the kind of job where you don't have, it's not rocket science, for one thing. It's not rocket science.
Most people would say that.
And if you have that kind of job, that's probably the kind of job you need to get next time around.
Yeah.
Because, it's either that or Walmart.
Selling stuff to the Japanese tourism industry is a expertise that you develop here in a place that caters in the hospitality industry.
Yeah.
And so certainly, what did the lady do? She decided to quit after actually having some run-ins with her employer.
And that's an interesting notion there too, because this does not apply only when you quit. It also applies when you get fired.
Yes.
So no matter how your employment was terminated, you wear the harness of the covenant not to compete.
So I can lay you off and then say, and on top of that, you can't work in the state.
Yeah.
Or whatever the restriction
Okay,
is.
you were talking about Del Rosario. What happened after she quit?
So this poor lady, she, wanted to work as an independent contractor for HIS. And, what's HIS is love, what is it? Love something travel? I mean, they support, you see their signs all over the place to act as a briefer. And so this was considered a violation of the trade secrets of Sevens. And they sued, and they got an injunction to prevent her from working for 3 years. And so this poor lady, she tried to make a living as a makeup stylist and a bus driver. And so that's kind of the state of the imbalance between what employers are actually doing versus the rights of employees to basically make a living. And so the courts have kind of a test of 3 things that they
Yeah, I wanted to ask you that. What is the policy that supports this here in HAWAIIAN, which is usually a very democratic state, a state that cares? I mean, it's off the plantations, it's off the, the whole, I don't really want to say, the whole way of thinking in our state is all favoring the employee, sometimes too much. But in this one case, it doesn't favor the employee.
Yeah, because so the common law roots of this type of covenant provided for 3 ways to analyze it, right? So the item had to be limited in scope, meaning it can't be so broad as to say that you can't work, right? That would just be too broad a
Work
scope.
at all.
Yeah.
Okay, but that doesn't help very much if you...
This is the thing that you know how to do for your livelihood, right? And then the other one is time. So how long is the value of the trade secret that you're protecting?
The hypothetical trade secret.
Yeah, briefing and selling trinkets and tours, right? Promotional tours. And then finally, geography. And so you need to limit it by geography. And so, but in Hawaii, the courts have found varying degrees of scope, and that depends on who you get as your judge. But for time,
and what kind of a hair day he's having.
Yeah.
Really, I
Right.
mean, it's there's so much discretion in this area, and he can really decide whatever he wants, whatever he feels that day, and exactly where the line is. There's no bright line anywhere in this. So you make it up as you go.
right. For scope, definitely for scope. For time is 3 years, and for
So 3 years would be, beyond 3 years would be too much. Is that settled?
I don't know that it's settled, but at least 3 years is allowed. So this poor lady was barred for at least 3 years.
Yeah.
3 years was her agreement.
That's hard.
And then the state, the entire state, is a reasonable geography. Oh, I forgot that's what it's called. It's the reasonable rule.
You'd think you could, go to another island, but not. Even another island, you're stuck.
Yeah, so, right, the Traeger guy was barred from the entire state. For the Del Rosario woman, her contract said only Oahu. At the court level, the judge said the whole state. The one thing the Supreme Court did rule in that case was that, well, the contract actually said only Oahu, so she was only barred from Oahu. But
Who could ask for more?
yeah, there you go.
Well, this is hard stuff. Did they, ever explain in any of these decisions exactly why they were coming down so heavily on the employee?
I don't.
I guess they just say, well, if she signed the paper, she's bound.
Right.
And this is not unenforceable. This is not against public policy. Therefore, we will allow this paper to, to be enforceable.
Right.
Pretty tough, though.
Yeah, and it's tough because most employees don't know what they're signing at the time that they're
Yeah,
signing.
well, their economic power at the time they take the job is like 0.
Right.
It's a job. My goodness, I'd like to have the job. They make me sign my children away. Okay, and people will sign just
Yeah,
about
that's why
anything.
indentured servitude used to be okay, but the law doesn't allow it, right?
Yeah. Well, but you've done some surveys of the law in other places, and I wonder, you know, what it's like in other states,
Yep.
Because this is a state-by-state issue, it's not a federal
Right.
issue yet. And I wonder what you've found over the country on this issue.
And so there's an amazing variation in the rules in all of the states, but the one that sticks out the most, right, at the other end of the spectrum is California. And for California, on the whole, non-competes are not enforceable except when you sell the interests of a business. That's pretty reasonable,
So
right?
the scenario they're carving out is when I sell my business, and I sell my business, then I can restrict to you can restrict me from working for somebody else.
Or competing in exactly the same business, because potentially there's a lot of goodwill.
Selling all the goodwill.
Right, and so the example I was thinking of is if someday I become a restaurateur and I buy Roy's, and I buy it from Roy, and I say, hey, I want to keep your name because everybody knows it, you make great food, everybody loves it. I really don't want him to open up the real Roy's right next door a couple of days later, right? That would probably ruin a lot of the goodwill that was attached to the business.
Yeah,
so that's something that was sold
deal.
with the deal, right?
Yeah.
But when you're selling your ability to work, you're not. It's not quite the same to sign away those types of rights at the same time as part of your stack of papers with 401ks and
It's a bargaining
health insurance.
position issue.
Right.
Okay, so as a matter of policy in California, covenants not to compete are unenforceable
Right.
except, as you say, in the carve out for the sale of a business.
Right, and so that works out really well for them, right? And so earlier, there have been a lot of studies comparing Massachusetts, which on the one hand has a non-compete policy very similar to Hawaii, and California, which has the you can't really do it. So they have kind of two ends of the spectrum. And the industry that was compared was a technology industry, because if you remember when Lotus and some of those big companies were coming up.
I'm old enough.
Yeah, me too. But when they were coming up, they had there was a competition, right, between Boston and the Silicon Valley to be preeminent for technology in the United States and thus the world. And they had kind of similar backgrounds with MIT and Harvard as academic centers of knowledge and ideas on the East Coast, and Stanford and Berkeley on the West Coast, and with the Silicon Valley and Boston providing all of this labor and ideas moving forward. And so there was a suspicion, right, that Silicon Valley has obviously won, and Boston is a poor second. So there was a suspicion that, maybe having these non-competes hurt the ability to take a big business that has all of its employees under non-competes, not allow them to do any more work. Does that actually inhibit the spin-offs from businesses? I mean, most casual observers would say yes, but if you're the owner of the big business, you're going to argue, no, we really need these things because it keeps Boston competitive, it protects our interests, nobody's going to want to invest in a place where their employees can just run away with all of their trade secrets, they're going to spill them all of this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so there were studies done. There have been studies done by Stanford, Harvard Business School, MIT, about what is the net effect of these policies on the economies of areas. And so the arguments for employee mobility, and it's not that the employees are going to steal your ideas and tell them, it's that the exchange of ideas, the free flow of ideas, and the abilities that you invest in yourself in order to create value for a bigger company that you're working for, but maybe someday for your own company. Those kinds of driving entrepreneurial spirits are what make people want to work hard and make people want to invent. And so the studies were pretty clear that the policies of allowing for employee mobility that you see in California were much superior to what was going on in Massachusetts.
Yeah, which is trying to protect itself from having a brain drain to California.
Exactly.
We're going to take a short break. This is so interesting. Jeff Hong, tech executive with Tech Mana LLC. This is Think Tech Talks. I'm Jay Fidell. We're talking about covenants not to compete in Hawaii, and we're just beginning the discussion. We'll be right back after this short break.
We want to thank our underwriters.
Hawaiian Electric Company and its affiliates Maui Electric on Maui and Hawaii Electric Light Company on Hawaii Island are deeply committed to the communities they serve.
Galen Ho is a senior executive of BAE Systems, a global defense, security, and aerospace company.
The High-Tech Development Corporation, the state's leading technology agency, attached to the Department of Business, Economic Development, and Tourism.
Castle and Cook Hawaii, with a time-honored legacy that spans more than 160 years and revolves around its mission of investing in Hawaii, creating communities, and providing for the needs of our state.
Hawaii Gas, formerly the Gas Company, a proponent of the Liquefied Natural Gas Initiative, helping Hawaii achieve its transition to clean energy and a better...
Okay, we're back. We're live. We're here on Think Tech Talks on a given Wednesday in the 3 to 4 block. We're talking about covenants not to compete with Jeff Hong, a tech executive who has studied the area and is very facile about covenants not to compete. So one question to punctuate our break was, so this is a small text, kind of small font problem then, and when I get all the stack of papers and I take my job, why don't we change the law to make it much bigger font, really big, really bold, so I know I'm stuck on this thing. What do you think?
Oddly enough, Oregon did that. So when you sign an employee agreement, if there's a covenant not to compete, you have to explain it to the employee, and so that is a method to help at least alleviate the, wow, I really didn't know this was going on. Now, granted, right, and this was another study done, over 70% of the people, they accepted the job, they turned down all of their offers, and then they were told about the covenant not to compete, most of them on their first day of work, right? So even in the stack of papers, there's lots of stuff they should be telling you, and it's still going to be varied. But at least it's not four lines of a paragraph in a 3-page document. It can be a document unto itself. So that kind of helps. And some states were trying to address this font issue in that fashion.
You know what this shows, though? It shows that we like getting questions by Twitter.
Oh, yeah, no, that's kind of fun, right?
And if you want to send us a question, you can do this too. It's the Twitter handle is ThinkTechHi, H-I. Send us questions. We'll answer them. Jeff will answer any question. So, now come forward to Hawaii. Okay, Hawaii is pretty much in Massachusetts condition, is
right.
it?
Certainly.
Which is really too bad because, employers sit there with 27 lawyers and they write papers that you don't really read, and you sign the papers, and you have no bargaining position except to not take the job,
right.
essentially. I mean, you ever see an employer saying, well, okay, we appreciate your concern about this, Jeff, so why don't we try to negotiate some reasonable settlement of the language in this printed form, this cohesion form? Right. Doesn't happen. You take it or leave it. If you don't like it, take a walk.
Right.
And so, this isn't so very good, and the result is that the employer, has a huge advantage. And in Hawaii, since it's enforceable here, we're doing the same thing. We're forcing people to leave. We think we're holding them, but we're really forcing them to leave.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's the same problem.
So can I give you an esoteric game theory story? So the economists that have been studying this problem liken it to something called the prisoner's dilemma. And so the prisoner's dilemma works like this. So Tanya and Chinque, oddly, I'm reading the actual study here, have been arrested. So they robbed this bank.
I love this story.
Yeah. And so they get caught and they're put in 2 separate cells where they can't talk to each other, right? And so they have this pretty smart prosecutor, and he goes, okay, tell you what. He talks to each of them. You can choose to confess or remain silent, all right? If you confess and your accomplice remains silent, I'll drop all charges against you, and I'll throw the book at your accomplice. Sounds good.
Okay.
So it makes you want to confess.
So that's
if
one
you don't
option,
care about
one
the
option.
person, right?
Confess.
Okay. If your accomplice also confesses, then I get 2 convictions. And so for gaining 2 convictions, I'll talk to the parole board, and you'll both get lesser sentences.
Okay.
They'll get heavy sentences, but you'll get lesser sentences.
Okay. And
But
you
if-
won't know.
Yeah, and you won't know, right? If you both remain silent, well, I don't have enough evidence to find you guilty, but I do have you on these kind of lesser firearms violation because you're holding a firearm at the time. And so I'll give you that. So you get this nominal sentence, but you both have to remain silent, right? So then, and I'm only going to give you, tonight, you have to write down on a note which choice you're going to make. And so, which one do you want to be, and which one should I be? So right, so if you're the
lose a
person,
night's sleep
yeah.
as well, you know.
But if you're me and I don't care about you, I was like, well, I should confess, right? Because I should rat you out and confess, and so I will get either nothing or the kind of parole after being found guilty of the armed robbery. So either way, it's kind of okay, because depending upon what you do, if you stay quiet, then I'm free. And if you confess, then and if you rat me out, then we still have this kind of lesser, we'll still get out on parole. So no matter what, it always kind of, you think at least, it's in your best interest to confess. But really, if you both do the thing that is not the best for you individually, you both have the best advantage of what goes on in the end, because collectively, because you'll both get out with the lesser charge. And so the way that they described it here is that you're always better off confessing than remaining silent, and the outcome obtained in both to confess is worse than the outcome if they would have remained silent. And the view of the puzzle is it's a conflict between individual and group rationality. A group whose members pursue rational self-interest may end up in a worse off than a group that acts contrary to your self-interest. And so that's, if you think about the technology industry between Boston and California, that's what they're in. So every company has a self-interest in keeping their employees and trying to keep the pie unto themselves.
Right.
But if every employer does that, then there's this lack of a pollination and cross ideas that occurs, which does occur in California because you cannot do this, and so you suffer for it. So by holding on to your employees, it's great for your self-interest of your business, but it's really bad for your region. And so good public policy does stuff that's good for the region, right?
The prisoner's dilemma.
Yeah.
Okay, that's Jeff Hong, tech executive with TechMana LLC. We got one more break. This is Think Tech Talks, talking about covenants not to compete. We'll be right back.
I'm Hong Jiang, host for Asia in Review on Tuesdays.
And I'm David Day, host for Asian Review on Thursdays. Both of us broadcast our respective shows at 4 p.m.
And my topics tend to deal with questions related to environment, culture, history, and sometimes human rights.
And my shows tend to be on international business, foreign policy, geopolitics, and national security. And you can watch our shows live on the ThinkTech website at thinktechhawaii.com.
And you can also watch us on YouTube or Olalo.
So come join us on Thursdays at 4 p.m. I'm David Day.
And on Tuesdays at 4 p.m., I'm Hong Jiang.
Aloha.
Aloha.
We're back. We're live. I'm Jay Fidell. This is Think Tech Talks. We're talking about covenants not to compete here in Hawaii with Jeff Hong, tech executive with TechMana LLC. And it's a difficult problem, and it's directly related to the development of the tech industry. That's the thing. That's why we're talking about this. But let me give you the sad sack story of the small tech company which finds a very important, critical employee and trains that person, brings that person right into all the secrets and intellectual property development, all that stuff, and sort of invests itself in this one. And there's not a lot of employees because there's not a lot of money, and wants a covenant not to compete so they can protect their investment in this guy. Don't we want to protect this, effectively, the startup company from losing a critical employee?
Without a doubt. And the way that you protect from losing an employee is by treating them well, right? Giving them good incentive
the old
to
treat
stay.
them well argument.
And, oh my gosh.
have to treat
Even
them
if
well.
we can't chain them to the desk, maybe we can entice them with donuts and coffee at the desk. So you have one of two choices there. But it's, and this is where some of these studies have that have gone on have spawned off additional studies in sociology. And so they had subjects in simulated non-compete situations doing a task. And they showed significantly less motivation and got worse results on effort-based tasks for the ones that were in the simulated non-compete versus not. And so if you have the star employee and you've invested a lot in them, in order to maximize the output of that person, giving them the freedom to leave in some sense is an incentive for them to work. But additionally, trying to lock them in with a covenant not to compete. So if I have this totally grand idea, or my employee has this totally grand idea and I want to keep them, the unfortunate reality of trying to use a covenant not to compete to lock in an idea to a geography and a job is just specious, right? They will go to California, where covenants not to compete are not enforceable.
And the idea goes to California.
Exactly, and that's why there's a whole lot of really good ideas and people in California. And you would be hard-pressed, although you might win, to go to California, where the courts will say covenants not to compete are not enforceable here. You can go to Hawaii court and try to get that done. But additionally, they can go to China, they can go to Singapore, they can go to any other
really
jurisdiction.
protecting anything.
Right. For
The interesting aspect about that is that you're losing that employee from the economy, and that's really. And you could give him, if you want to hold him. There's one step further. If you want to hold him here, you can make him a partner.
Exactly.
You can give him some stocks, some warrants, any kind of equity ownership, and now you're treating him well. You're bringing him in. You're sugar rather than.
And that's why if you go to California and you work for a startup, that's what they typically give you, right?
Yeah.
They give you an equity stake so that the success of the company is aligned with your success.
Yeah.
And those are the ways that you encourage people, and from the study, encourage people to work hard like it's theirs because it is.
And that's the modern view, isn't it? I mean, that's the view of a tech society. I always used to, and I'm not even thinking about covenants not to compete. I always used to think about the new Fitzsimmons big pharma center outside of Denver. Mm-hmm. It's a tech center there, and there was a guy who started it. Robert Olson was his name. And I said to him, how can you, bring all these big pharma researchers from all over the country? Well, I can bring them here because I offer them breakfast. Because breakfast makes them talk to each other. They share each other. Right. There's nothing more that they like to do than talk to each other about their projects. And, and the idea too, part of that and part of, I think, would work here is if you don't like your employer, if he's not treating you well, you have to be free to go across the other side of the quad and get another job the same day. Right. And this is a good thing because this builds an industry.
And it builds an industry and an industry that has a home, right?
Yeah, right. A physical location, which is what we need. I mean, we have so much brain drain going on anyway, and it has taken such a huge toll out of our economy over all these years. To have this law in place now just seems so silly because it is enhancing the departure, the brain drain.
Well, and in fact, other jurisdictions, as I pointed out, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Minnesota, Virginia, New Hampshire, all of them in this legislative session are considering changes to the laws to make their states more competitive.
It's a national trend then.
Yeah,
that's
definitely.
what we have here.
It's a time to look and to see what effects these types of laws and restrictions are having on your economies and see if you want to change them.
So if you wanted to change it, I mean, it sounds to me like you could just, enact a statute that said no more covenant, the California approach.
Certainly, one could do that here, but I think there would also be a bit of resistance.
Why?
There are a lot of industries that use these types of covenants. Oddly enough, doctors use them. People in
That's true, isn't it?
manufacturing, not manufacturing, construction use them a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So there will be a lot of businesses that will be affected, and if you, again, look at your self-interest, maybe you don't want to do it, but taking the broader picture of what's good for the state of Hawaii, and it's a two-edged sword, right? In the fact that on the one hand, you can try to keep people from leaving, but on the other hand, you can't take people, right? That's the whole thing about competition. I can choose to buy from different places. I can choose to work in different places. And trying to stifle that, on the whole, is probably bad for raising capital and
The whole economy,
Right.
really. But in terms of, our interest here in ThinkTech, in terms of, our commitment to trying to build a tech industry, we would focus first on technology.
Oh, yeah.
And it seems that this is most appropriate in the case of technology,
Yeah,
because we're trying to build an industry all these years.
Well, and additionally, technology, on the one hand, does not know boundaries, geographic boundaries. So the geographic limitation that you're trying to protect with a covenant not to compete, for a really good idea, it's just going to flee. And so the thing you were trying to protect isn't really,
It's really
well
protectable
protected.
anyway.
But we have all the pain of none of the benefits of keeping these types of laws around.
Yeah, well, the pain is pretty terrible because first thing that happens is you get demand letters and you have to stop working.
Right.
And if you don't listen, you get sued. And a lot of the time, your new employer gets sued.
Right.
For interfering with your relationship with the previous employer. Everybody goes to court. The previous employer could be a big monolithic company with unlimited funds to keep you in court like forever, ruin your economic life, maybe your life.
Right.
Just because of this covenant that was slipped into the pile. So it's really, it could be a really terrible result.
Well, and the other thing is, right, so people flee to California as a jurisdiction for good ideas. And, if you think about Hawaii, if we could change the laws for technology to make it a jurisdiction that people flee to, what are you doing here? You're saying that the most talented people are going to try to come to this destination of Hawaii to open their businesses, and people might even try to sue to stop them. That's really good public policy to try to drive people here. They're trying to get here, they're being sued to stop. And so what that reminded me of is when I was a kid, we went on a tour of the Big Island. And in the Big Island, there's this place called the City of Refuge.
Sure.
And so in the City of Refuge, yeah, if you broke a kapu, you could run over there and live out your life. Well, yeah, we could be a city of refuge for ideas. And so people with ideas that need to flee their kapu breaking non-compete in Boston or wherever can come over here, see this place as a place that they can live. It's a great place to live, right? And then there'll be other people in exile with you, living in your little city of refuge that you can exchange ideas. They'll be across the quad from you, right?
Hawaii, the state of refuge, the city of refuge, Honolulu, in the tech industry. All you guys from MIT, come on out.
There we go. I'll invite you out here.
That's Jeff Hong, tech executive in Tech Mana LLC here in Hawaii. This is Think Tech Talks. I'm Jay Fidell. We've been discussing covenants not to compete, and we'll discuss them again. Thank you very much, Jeff.
All right. Thank you, Jay.
Aloha.